Hello and welcome to the Revolutionizing Media podcast. In today's episode, we will be discussing technology in the film industry. I'm here with Jason, an independent filmmaker, director, videographer, and photographer. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jason.
Hello, Evan. Thank you for having me.
Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the film industry?
Yes. Growing up, I've started doing film when I was in high school. And I guess I've been dabbling into the digital media side ever since then. And usually, I like to hone my skills around video work and photography most of the time. It wasn't until probably after high school that I started dabbling more into short films and independent filmmaking more. And that's when I worked with more of my friends and stuff who were really into doing film most of the time. Yeah.
Cool. So, do you just want to tell us a little more about the projects sort of you worked on, what you guys used, how they were sort of organized?
So in my recent film that I've made, which is called One Night, that was written and directed under me, and I got a lot of help through other peers of mine, and especially in the screenwriting department. Definitely had to dabble a lot of that kind of stuff. I kind of really worked around with either with school equipment that was funded by them. Usually it's be like Leeward Community College. Um, and usually their camera gears would revolve on Sony equipment and stuff like that. Otherwise, outside of school, some technologies that I've worked with would be one of my peers. They carry a Sony FX3 model, and usually technologies like these that are actually more capable of independent filmmakers to really start up their films in this industry and stuff like that. So, I was really lucky enough to have technologies such as these type of camera gears and especially audio too as well, to be capable of making me tell my stories through these films. So yeah.
From your perspective, what are the main ways new technologies that are available to independent filmmakers, how have they changed the industry?
I feel being an independent filmmaker or just in the filmmaking industry, um, I think community is also just really important. And I feel on top of that, it really just has to do with what you are capable of accessing, which is if it's either with the school that can help you provide you that type of technology, or if it's with peers and networking. I think networking is also pretty important. Otherwise, I think those technologies won't be as accessible for us to be able to tell our stories. Um, and I feel that's just really important because with those type of technologies, I think then would it really help us start up our stories and our films that we want to tell and stuff like that. And I think that's just something really important to have.
So with these technologies, what's available to independent filmmakers, do you think storytelling as a whole has seen a change as a result of the access of these technologies?
I feel there's so many perspectives in that one too. But I feel it could be both in some ways. It really depends on the artist and what they can do with the technologies that they have access to, limited or not. I feel really you could even tell a story just as good without having that type of quality delivery that you have, like what you envision on picture. Sometimes telling a story could just be just as powerful to share, regardless of what quality technology that you have. There are so many setbacks to it, of course, but if you are able to work around those limitations as well, I feel people can still just as much tell a story just as good without having that certain amount of technology that they have access to. So yeah.
So one of the new when I look at it from sort of an outside perspective is
Mm-hmm.
that distribution of film has changed a lot with the internet, with different platforms and streaming services, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how have different online platforms impacted the distribution of film? And what does that look like for independent filmmakers?
Oh, if I were to just give an example, is it platforms like YouTube and like Vimeo.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I know like on YouTube, I like to, all those sort of short horror films. I just
Right,
like to like binge watch those, and I think it could be a good way for people to get their name out there, right?
right. No, like this question is very like it's a good question. The thing is
Thanks.
like the way I see it is like putting out films through like film festivals, like in those kind of platforms, I think only gives like I guess that type of impact really shows like what kind of audience you're trying to bring in. And sometimes there are some like restrictions to it. If you're trying to put a film out like into film festivals, that sets you a boundary that you can't really put that out to the public at a certain amount of time, just because that type of distribution gives you opportunities for other filmmakers to really be like noticed from other um like industries, like bigger industries and companies that really notices your work. As to other examples such as YouTube or say Vimeo, it's more flexible to the public because they can see it, and that really opens up to anybody who can really watch it. But it's really depending on those type of distributions, it's really who are you trying to attract in this type of audience, and I feel like that's also very important. So it depends on where that type of intention falls under and where it goes to when you put your films out in different platforms. Like it really falls like that type of ideal. Like for example, like my few films are one of the films I've put out for film, like for film festivals. It really has to be like a set boundary where I can't really put it out yet until I can fully put it out in the public, on, like for example, like YouTube, just because I try to want to get like other film festivals and other industries to really view my work. And some people are like lucky enough to like put it on YouTube just because their intention is like they just like to put their creative work openly for everyone to see. And that's not to say it's a bad thing. It's just really, it's like YouTube is like basically any work that you put in there is like as you build your content, it's like very content based. It just builds your portfolio on top of those other things. As to like something like films, there's a lot of intention when it comes to like storytelling, and I think that's like very different to that type of perspective. But not to say that storytelling on YouTube on a different platform is like not as significant or valuable. It's just that it's because you want to, you know?
It sort of sounds like you want to put your work or try to get your work into a film festival before ever like uploading it
Yeah,
on an
anywhere.
online
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah, like say there are film festivals like where the processing and like those kind of things, we have to put it on like Vimeo, for example, but it has to be like privated and stuff like that. Because we don't really allow like the public to really see it until later. Depending on the organization that you're trying to like put the film festival in, they really have like those type of restrictions only because it's part of their design on how they want to like show it and stuff like that. But basically, like there are films like that, but then prior or like not prior, but like after that, there are some films that are like later like visible to the Vimeo platforms, like for example, and eventually then there are some films like in there in that type of media distribution that you can only see in Vimeo, but you can't see it on YouTube. And I feel like there's a filter, you know.
That's really interesting. I didn't know what the process, yeah, is for film festivals, but it's interesting because it's also like you want to be working on a portfolio and getting yourself noticed on these platforms. But then when it comes to the actual film festival process, it's a little different. Yeah.
Yeah.
How big of a role do you think film festivals still play in the film industry for getting independent filmmakers noticed, maybe by bigger studios or keeping in mind like online distribution and those different platforms?
As big of a role I think film festivals play in the filmmaking industry, they still play a very significant role for smaller artists who are trying to bring out their work. I feel like that really gives like access to artists to reach out to other artists and kind of build that networking. And that's how much, if any type of work that you put out really gets noticed from other artists or from any other independent filmmakers, it gives them these opportunities that will help them like collaborate and network with other individual filmmakers, because you know we see each other as a common interest and similar type of work. And especially with the stories that we tell, like we can really resonate to so much of these stories in some ways and to some aspects. And so like that itself, I feel like with networking, and then most definitely, I mean, building that type of portfolio as an independent filmmaker and putting it out there for like the bigger film industries, um, it really shows how much growth these filmmakers can really potentially have in being in the bigger like Hollywood films. And I can't really name on top of like any directors or filmmakers who started out small, but I mean there are so many stories that how they started out. You know, they really it took years for them to grow their type of work to really be noticed and stuff. And I think starting where it is at like film festivals are at, I feel like that's just a good starting point for people to really expand onto their passions with their independent filmmaking and storytelling.
I saw that the independent film Anora from Sean Baker won the Oscar for Best Picture. Did you see that?
What film is it?
Anora?
I don't think I've seen that.
No?
I need to watch more
I didn't
movies.
I haven't watched it either, but I saw that. Basically, the director in his acceptance speech for the Oscar, he praised independent filmmakers, saying long live independent film, that this is possible still.
Hmm.
So, do you see independent films taking a larger portion of the film market in the future compared to studio productions? If you look at like
Bigger
box
studios.
office or how much revenue they're generating, do you think independent films will take more from the studios and draw more eyes to independent film with how successful some of them have been?
If I give like a little bit of 2 cents, because like I feel like I don't really, I feel like for me, I don't really see it taking the bigger,
Like a bigger portion of the market?
yeah, I don't really
Yeah.
see it taking like the bigger portion, um, like in the limelight of like studio productions compared to studio productions. Just because like it really, there's like so much communities out there. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we don't really have enough exposure to really share these stories. But generally speaking, it's just like the bigger studios are like super out there, and it's not like the same type of funding that you get compared to like independent filmmaking. There's still like a bigger process into like telling, like trying to create your narrative and then getting it funded generally, because you have to pull a pitch and everything, and that's also a process on top of like you kind of building in that impression to get that access to like technologies and paying your actors and crew members. Like it's just a lot of those kind of stuff. I don't know. There's just like that perspective.
So independent filmmakers sort of have to face a lot of different things like funding and crew, things that are maybe structured and organized a little better in studio productions.
I would say in that kind of way. I know a friend of mine, she's in school and she's also pursuing in filmmaking in California, but she's trying to pull a pitch too where she has to organize like her film in a way where she has to convince that this story that you're trying to share is enough to get funded for her film to be shared and to be produced. And the bigger studio industries and stuff, I feel like that itself is also like just a challenge that we have to work around. But at the same time, like it's really like the type of access that we get, like if it's from the school or from other peers of ours who have like the technology in hand that they can use and stuff.
Do you think traditional film studios can learn anything from independent filmmakers or vice versa?
I think like studio film industries and like indie films, definitely they could like learn from each other, because like When you actually notice like the style of filmmaking in like bigger studios compared to indie filmmakers and stuff or indie films and stuff, like you can kind of pinpoint a little bit like different abstract storytelling in those kind of films, like Marvel or something, like those type of big studio films where it's just a lot about concept is based around a comic, and of course they have like the kind of funding where they have the higher technologies and cast and crew members that they have, and like that type of aspect is really good under those kind of circumstances. And then some like indie films or like independent filmmakers that try to tell their stories, and I think they use like their own creative visual piece of like framing their stories in a more abstract way. I feel like that is also something that I noticed too. Like there's so many artistic ways that its stories are being told, but also falls on top of like challenges that you face with like technology that you have access to, like with camera, the production crews, and the cast members. Like that kind of stuff is just like it really depends on how you tell your story. Yeah, I think that kind of theme is like something that they can learn from each other, and then it's like here, like one or the other. Like you can have all this type of access, and you can tell the story however you want, but it can also like have this vision, that this visual piece, cinematography, be told in a creative way without having the type of expensive gear that you have that bigger studios have access to. You know, there's like little pieces that these two things can learn or pick up from each other.
Jason, you've shared some really great insights today on how technology, is sort of changing the film industry for independent filmmakers. And one of my main goals for the project is to get a projection of the potential future of the film industry. So, do you think we'll eventually face the extinction of traditional studios for completely independent studios and independent filmmakers? Or will the industry reach an more of an equilibrium where there still are the major studios and independent filmmakers? So what do you see for the future in the film industry?
I think there will be like that type of balance, or like there will be like still the big studios still creating films, while at the same time like other indie filmmakers are still creating their own films. I feel like there is no like one is minimized compared to others. I think it all just falls under like community, and like if film festivals and other indie filmmakers were to put together these type of events to tell our stories for our audiences and stuff, I think regardless, I don't see any of them being pushed aside or tucked away or being like kind of like a fad kind of thing. There's still gonna be like that fine line between like there's still industries from the bigger studios telling their films or stories, and there's still indie films that are still telling their stories within that type of community. Something very small of a gesture, but I feel like could really expand so much more meaning to a lot of like these indie films and like film festivals and like these type of communities telling their stories. I think when you're bringing people together, there's so much value to that, because I, for one, like I have a cohort of my classes who's put together our own films together, and at the end of these like deadlines, we would like kind of host like these private small like get-togethers just for everyone to see our films and just kind of like admire each other's work. And
Private screenings or
yeah,
things
like
like
pretty
that?
much like very just peers that we know from each other. Like we just create like a small social event just for us to like just display our work onto a screen. And I feel like that's just one aspect compared to like bigger film festivals that host together like a bigger audience for people to see. And like little things like those, I feel like is what keeps it alive and keeps storytelling and filmmaking so much more meaningful for people to be able to put their work out. You know, like those things are like we can kind of create meaning out of like these small things that we do for each other and stuff like that.
it's sort of the process of making it, but then also what you get from that afterwards, the socializing, the networking with like-minded people, right? That
Yeah.
have similar, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so.
How do you see AI being implemented more into filmmaking?
Some ways it can be beneficial and like for filmmakers and artists or maybe like editors, video editors and stuff like that. Maybe it's not really the best case to fully rely on any case scenario on any challenges that we face in the process of filmmaking. Like in some ways it could be like yeah, beneficial. And in some ways I feel like we can't really also just be fully dependent on top of it because I feel like that also takes away depending on the process of filmmaking, it could take away your creative liberty on what you're trying to portray in filmmaking and your storytelling especially. So in that kind of aspect. But if it comes to like technical wise, I feel like that's that's where it can help you in some ways in those kind of situations. If it's like working with video editors and people have to like clean up some things in the editing process, like clean up audio and stuff like that, and if it does the job in the way that AI needs you to be, then those kind of things can like help you benefit in a way in that type of workflow. But if it's like something about, I don't know, changing the environment or tone of your film, like in like the visual piece of it, I think that takes away that type of characteristic about yourself and what you're trying to show in your
It
stories.
takes away the human touch to the
Possibly,
film, yeah.
possibly. So something like that was an example I would probably think of.
All right, Jason. Well, thank you so much for coming onto the show. I
Yes.
appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I feel very honored.
If you would like to see more of Jason's creative work, I left the links to his socials and his personal website in the description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.